Before I get into tonight's stories, I want you to picture something for me. Imagine walking through a house where nobody has lived for years. The floors creak under your feet. The wallpaper is peeling off in long strips. Every room you enter feels like a snapshot of a life that just stopped. Whoever lived there left in a hurry, or maybe they didn't leave at all. Now, imagine realizing you are not alone inside that house. That feeling, that specific, stomach-dropping moment, is what connects every single story I have for you tonight. 4 accounts, 4 abandoned houses, 4 moments that the people involved still cannot fully explain. Stay with me. Things get very unsettling very quickly.
I grew up hearing about it. Everyone in my hometown did. There was this abandoned military village on the outskirts of town, not far from the airport, and it had been sitting there since 1984. For 30 years, it just existed, behind chain-link fences and rusted no trespassing signs, slowly rotting in place while the rest of the town moved on around it. During the Cold War and World War II, the base had been fully operational. More than 200 military families lived there at its peak. It was practically its own small community, houses, a church, a whole infrastructure just for the people stationed there. And then, seemingly overnight, it was gone. Everyone left, and nothing was taken. The village was just sealed off and forgotten. By the time I was growing up, it had become local legend. Every kid in town had a theory about what was really out there. Some said a cult had taken over the grounds and used the church for rituals. Others swore the government was still running experiments underground, deep beneath the old buildings. There were ghost stories, obviously, apparitions in the windows, lights moving through the dark. None of it was ever confirmed, but none of it was ever really disproven either. That was part of what made the place so magnetic. My older brother fed into it. I was in middle school when he came home one night claiming he'd been inside. My friends were sleeping over, and he burst into my room looking genuinely rattled. He told us about the church. He said there was a trap door next to the altar and that he could hear moaning coming from somewhere below the floor. I didn't believe a word of it, but that didn't stop it from keeping me awake that night. Real or not, it added another layer to the myth. For years after that, my friends and I would talk about going. We'd say things like, "Once we can drive, we'll go." And then we could drive, and we still didn't go. Not because we forgot about it, it came up constantly. It was more that we didn't actually know where the entrance was. And also, even though the village was abandoned, it was still technically military property. We had no idea what kind of trouble we'd be looking at if we got caught. Senior year of high school, that all changed. My friend Alex showed up one afternoon with this look on his face, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. He told us he had the location. Someone he knew had been inside and given him specific directions. None of us believed him, so I called his bluff. I told him that if he was so sure, we should just go. I figured we'd drive out there, find nothing, and that would be the end of it. We left around 11 at night, 4 of us in my car. Alex was up front, directing me, except he wasn't very confident about the directions. He kept telling me to pull over, convinced each turnoff was the right one, and each time it turned out to be nothing. But then we found it, an overgrown dirt road almost completely hidden by trees, and half buried in the weeds beside it was a battered old no trespassing sign. Alex and my other friend Nick were already out of the car before I even put it in park. They wanted to keep going. Scott, who was with us, wasn't nearly as enthusiastic. He'd been anxious the whole ride over. I turned off my headlights and slowly rolled the car down the dirt path. We came to one of those gate arms, the kind you see at parking lots, but there was no booth, no guard, no one. I got out, lifted the arm manually, and we kept moving. That's when things started to feel real. On either side of the road there was furniture, old furniture, beds, dressers, side tables, wardrobes, just dumped in the trees like someone had backed up a moving truck and pushed everything out. We drove past a second gate arm and lifted that one too, and then we were inside. I don't have a better word for it than surreal. It looked exactly like a neighborhood, except everything was wrong. The houses were intact but decaying. Some had roofs caved in, others still had curtains in the windows. There was a church at the center of it all, and I pulled up right in front of it and cut the engine. We got out quietly, no one was saying much. The first thing I noticed was that I couldn't see any cameras anywhere, which made me feel marginally better. We went into the church first. Graffiti covered every surface, tags and drawings and words I couldn't make out in the dark. I looked for the trapdoor my brother had described all those years ago and found nothing, of course. Then we started exploring the houses. That's where the atmosphere really started to get to me. Some of the units were completely destroyed from the inside out. Walls punched through, floors collapsed, ceilings hanging, but a few of them were almost intact. Those were worse. Walking into a house that still had furniture, still had the suggestion of someone's daily life. That felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate, like walking through someone's memory. Scott had been on edge from the moment we arrived. He kept stopping and looking over his shoulder, insisting that someone else was there. We told him to relax, that his imagination was running hot because of where we were. I believed that at the time. Then all four of us heard it. We were standing inside one of the houses when the sound cut through the silence. It was a slow, deliberate creaking, not the kind a house makes when the wind shifts, the kind a house makes when something is moving across the floor above you. We all looked at each other. No one spoke. Alex, being Alex, broke the silence by calling out into the dark, asking if anyone was there. The creaking stopped. That was somehow worse than if it had continued. I told everyone we were leaving. Alex and Nick pushed back. We'd come this far. We'd always talked about this place. Why leave now? But I was done. I had a feeling in my chest I couldn't shake, this low-grade wrongness that had nothing to do with ghost stories. I told him I had the car keys and I was going. We were almost at the front door when Scott stopped short and grabbed my arm. He pointed slowly at the side window of the house next door. 3 shadows were moving across the glass, human-shaped, head and shoulder silhouettes, drifting from one side of the window to the other and then disappearing around the back. I went to the window and looked out. I caught the tail end of the shadows moving into the backyard of the house we were in. I turned back to the group and said one word: run. We sprinted for the car. No discussion, no hesitation, we just ran. Scott was out in front of us. We were maybe 10 seconds from the car when he screamed. Not a startled noise, a full, raw scream that bounced off every building in that courtyard. Standing at the back door of my car was a woman, tall, wearing a long black dress that looked like it had been worn for decades without washing. She had the rear door open. One leg was already inside the car. She was getting in. When Scott screamed, she looked up, let go of the door, and walked calmly into the church. Just like that. No running, like she wasn't afraid of us at all. I checked the back seat before I got in. Empty. We drove out of there so fast I almost lost control on the dirt road coming out. We talked about it for the rest of that night, trying to come up with something rational. The most likely explanation was that the people we'd seen were homeless, using the abandoned village as shelter. That tracks. What doesn't track is why that woman would be trying to get inside a running car. What doesn't track is that we'd walked through the entire village without seeing a single sign that anyone had been there. No fire pits, no scattered belongings, nothing. And then the moment we tried to leave, they were everywhere. The village was demolished in 2014. There's more information about it online now than there ever was when I was growing up. Back then, the mystery was total. I've read some of it since, the history and the records, but nothing I've found explains what was happening inside those houses that night. All I know for certain is that if Scott hadn't screamed when he did, there would have been a stranger in the backseat of my car, and I have no idea what she would have done once we drove away.
There is a version of the story I tell people where everything has a rational explanation. An old woman, still living in a condemned house, maybe a little confused, maybe just private. A creaking chair on a rotting floor. 2 trespassers who spooked themselves. I've been telling myself that version for years. I'm not sure I believe it anymore. This was before my wife and I got married, when we were still young and reckless in the specific way that young people are reckless. Not hurting anyone, just doing things that could have easily gone wrong. Her thing was abandoned buildings. She was convinced that if she spent enough time in them, she'd find evidence of something she couldn't explain. I went along with it because I was in love with her, and also, honestly, because the adrenaline wasn't entirely unwelcome. We'd explored maybe a dozen places by the time we found this one. Warehouses, old schools, a few houses. I was always more concerned about the structural integrity than anything supernatural. Old buildings collapse. That's a real thing that happens, and it kills people. Every time we walked into one, I was mentally calculating the risk. This house did not inspire confidence. It was out in the middle of nowhere, no neighboring houses visible, just trees and overgrown grass, and this structure that looked like it was being slowly reclaimed by the earth. The siding was black with mildew. The porch had collapsed on one end. The front door was boarded up, which required some effort on my part to get through. Inside, the smell hit me immediately. Damp wood, mold, and something else underneath it that I couldn't quite place. The living room was barely a room anymore. Most of the floor was gone, replaced by a wide, dark hole that dropped down into the basement. We shone our flashlights into it and could see the outline of what was down there. Collapsed shelving, standing water, the glint of broken glass. I told her we should leave.
She told me to wait a minute. This was our routine. She started working her way through the adjoining room, picking through the debris, looking for anything that had belonged to whoever once lived here. I stayed near the door, convinced the floor wasn't going to hold both of us. After a few minutes, curiosity won out over caution, and I edged my way into the room to join her. She told me to check the upstairs. Before I could argue, she pointed out that the sooner we covered the whole house, the sooner we could leave. That was always her move, so I went up. The staircase was not happy about my wait. Every step announced itself. At the top, I turned right into the first bedroom. It had a bed, still made, with a folded bathrobe sitting across the foot of it. That detail bothered me more than anything else I'd seen so far. Something about the neatness of it, the suggestion that someone had just stepped out for a moment and never come back. There was a crawl space in the corner of the room. I've learned from doing this that crawl spaces are often where people stored things they didn't want to look at. I went in. It was low and tight, smelling strongly of rot and something animal. Inside were boxes of baby supplies, diapers, formula, little jars of food, all of it decades old, all of it coated in dust and cobwebs. Some of it had been chewed through by rodents. I was about to back out when I heard it, creaking, slow and rhythmic, coming from the far end of a narrow passage at the back of the crawlspace. The passage ran the length of the house toward the other bedroom. I wasn't going to fit through it, so I backed out and went the long way around. The sound got louder as I walked down the hall. By the time I was 2 feet from the doorway, it was unmistakable. Back and forth, slow and even like a metronome. I stepped through the doorway and stopped. A woman was sitting in a rocking chair, facing the window. Her back was to me. I could see the top of her head, white hair, thin, and the hem of a long dark skirt resting against the floor. She was rocking slowly, steadily, looking out at nothing. I didn't move. I was trying to see her reflection in the window glass, but it was too dark outside for that. I stood there for what felt like a long time. She didn't react to my presence at all. Then I shifted my weight, and the floor creaked under me. She stopped rocking. I told her I was sorry. I told her we didn't know anyone lived there, that we'd leave immediately. I was ready to turn around and go right then. But before I could, she started mocking again. Same pace, same rhythm, like she hadn't heard me at all. Something about that was worse than if she had screamed. The complete indifference. I took one more step toward her and asked if she was okay. She stopped again. Then she stood up. She stood in front of the chair with her back still to me, and then she made a sound, a low hum. Not a word, not a response. Just this flat, tuneless hum that seemed to come from deep in her chest. And then she turned around. She turned fast, faster than someone her age should have been able to move, and I ran. I don't have a detailed description of her face. It happened too quickly, and I wasn't looking at her face by the time she was fully turned around. What I can tell you is that her skin was very pale and very lined, and there was something about the way she moved that I have never been able to reconcile with a living person standing in an abandoned, boarded-up house with a hole in the living room floor. I ran downstairs telling my girlfriend we had to leave immediately, that someone was up there. She laughed at me. She was certain I was performing for her benefit, trying to scare her the way I'd done before. I begged her. She still didn't believe me. And then, against everything I was pleading with her to do, she went upstairs to see for herself. I followed her, staying at the top of the stairs. I watched her go to the end of the hall. I heard her say, "Oh my God." My heart stopped, and then she started laughing. She asked me if the rocking chair had scared me. There was no one in the room. She walked around the whole space, opened the closet, looked everywhere. The chair was there, no woman. She was genuinely delighted by this. She walked past me and said we could leave. We were halfway down the hall when we both heard it. The creaking, starting up again. Back and forth, back and forth. She stopped walking. She looked at me. She mouthed the words, "What is that?" She took a few steps back toward the bedroom. The creaking continued. And then, underneath it, she heard the humming. That same low, tuneless melody. She made it to the doorway, looked inside, and then she ran. She ran past me, down the stairs, and out the front door without stopping. By the time I got to the car, she was already inside with the doors locked. She didn't laugh again after that. We drove home in almost total silence. She kept asking me what we had seen, and I kept telling her I didn't know. When we drove past the house years later, it was gone. Not boarded up, not collapsed. Gone. No foundation, no debris, nothing. Like it had never been there. I've settled on the rational explanation when I have to. Old woman, abandoned house, trespassers who startled her, but the door was boarded from the outside. There was a 6-foot hole in the living room floor, and she disappeared from a room with one exit in the time it took me to walk downstairs and back up. I don't have another explanation. I'm not sure I want one.
The house next door to mine was never supposed to become a place I was afraid of. We moved into our house when I was in middle school. Good neighborhood, good block, a lot of kids my age. There was only one problem, and it was the man next door. He was old, reclusive, and furious at the concept of children existing near his property. We never once set foot in his yard. We made a point of it, but it didn't matter. The moment we appeared outside, he'd start banging on his window and screaming at us to get away from his house. This went on for about 6 months, and then it just stopped. We didn't see him anymore, didn't hear him. I made a dark joke to my friends that he must have died. It got a laugh, but the moment I said it, I felt wrong about it. About a month after he disappeared from view, I found out I was right. My friend Joel was staying over. We were asleep when the sound of sirens woke us up in the early morning hours. Red and blue light was flashing from my window. We got up and looked out, and at that exact moment, we watched 2 figures carry a zipped body bag out of the old man's house and load it into a vehicle. I'd seen that in movies 100 times. Seeing it in real life, 40 feet from my bedroom window, was completely different. I couldn't stop thinking about my joke, and I couldn't stop thinking about how long that bag might have been in there before anyone noticed. After that, the house sat empty. The old man had one son, but he lived in another state, and from what we could tell, had no interest in dealing with his father's estate. All the furniture stayed. All the belongings stayed. The house just sat there, sealed and untouched, for years. From my bedroom window, I had a direct line of sight into one of the rooms. I would sometimes look over there at night, at the dark and the stillness inside. I knew that a man had died somewhere in that house. That knowledge made it feel different from any other dark room. I was not above using this for my own amusement. Joel, the same friend who'd watched the body bag come out with me, was skittish on a good day. Whenever he was over, I'd tell him I'd seen the old man's ghost moving around inside. He'd cover his ears and beg me to stop. Everyone would laugh. I kept doing it because it worked every time. One night he called my bluff. He dared me to go inside. I started to decline. Breaking into someone's house, even an abandoned one, felt like a line I didn't want to cross. But Joel turned it around on me fast, and suddenly I was the coward with an audience of my friends watching to see what I'd do. I thought about it. The house had been empty for years. Nobody checked on it. I'd be in and out quickly, and nobody would ever know. The front door was locked and wasn't moving when I tried to kick it, mostly because I weighed about 130 pounds at the time. But a small window next to the door was unlocked. It slid open easily, like it had been left that way on purpose. I looked back at my friends watching from my window across the way, and I climbed inside. The smell was the first thing. It hit me the moment I was through the window. This dense, stale, sweet-sour smell that I immediately understood without being able to name. It was the smell of somewhere that had been closed up for years with something wrong inside it. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and kept going. The living room was exactly as the old man had left it. A recliner angled toward a television that hadn't been on in years. A book on the side table open to the middle with a bookmark in it, like he'd put it down meaning to come back. The kitchen was where the smell was worst. A coffee mug on the table in front of a specific chair. A sweater draped over the back of that chair. Pots on the stove, dusty and empty. I didn't stay long. Down the hall, I found the room I could see from my window. I went in, looked out, and saw my friends watching from across the yard. I waved. Joel looked stunned that I was still in there. I waved specifically at him. And then I heard it. A bang. Loud. Not ambiguous. Not a settling sound or a shift in the structure. A deliberate bang. Like something or someone hitting the wall hard, coming from the other side of the house. I went completely still. I waited. There was no follow-up sound. I looked back at my friends and could see from their expressions that they'd heard something or could tell that I've had. I didn't go investigate. I went to the front door, unlocked it from the inside, and left. Back at my house, I told my friends about the smell and about the bang. They were interested for a few minutes, and then the conversation moved on. We went to sleep. Joel woke me up in the middle of the night. He said he couldn't sleep because he kept hearing noises from next door. I told him his imagination was working overtime because of what I told him. He didn't argue. And then, in the silence, while I was waiting to fall back asleep, I heard it too. 2 slow knocks. Then nothing. Joel sat up and said that was what he'd been hearing. I went to the window. The house next door was dark in a way that felt solid, like the darkness had weight. Then Joel made a sign I didn't like. He asked me what was standing in the doorway of the room I'd been in earlier. I looked. There was a shape in the doorway. Tall. Still. The silhouette of a person standing just inside the room I'd been standing in an hour ago. I told him it was probably a code rack. I said it with more confidence than I felt. The others woke up from the noise we were making, and they looked too. Most of them agreed it looked like a person. While we were still debating it, Joel made that sound again. He pointed. The shape had moved. It was no longer in the doorway. It was standing at the window. The window I had just been looking through from the inside. Whatever it was had crossed the room and was now standing directly in front of the glass, close enough that we could see its outline clearly. The curve of a head and shoulders. The general shape of a tall person, standing perfectly still. We all lost it. Some people stepped back from the window. Someone grabbed my arm. I kept watching. And then the figure turned, walked slowly back toward the doorway,
and stepped into the darkness on the other side of the room. It just walked out of sight, and that was it. We watched that window for another 20 minutes. Nothing came back. I told everyone it was probably the sun. That was the only thing I could offer that had any chance of calming anyone down. In retrospect, it made no sense. Who shows up to a dead parent's house at 2 in the morning after years of absence? But in the moment, I was met with the alternative. About a year later, the son did show up. He rented a dumpster and gutted the place and sold it. My dad spoke to him briefly. He said he'd had a bad relationship with his father, and that it had taken him a long time to bring himself to come back. He'd never visited, not once, after his father died. So it wasn't him in the window that night. There were 5 of us watching, 5 separate sets of eyes that all saw the same thing move from one side of that room to the other. I've never had another experience that I couldn't eventually rationalize, even loosely. This one, I can't. I have nothing. The house is occupied now. Different family, different life happening inside those walls. But I still think about that room sometimes, about what I saw from the inside, and then what we saw from the outside. And I wonder if whoever lives there now has noticed anything, if the house kept whatever was inside it, or if it only appears to the people who already know to look.
I want to preface this by saying I am not someone who believes in the paranormal. I'm a skeptic by nature. I look for the practical explanation first, and I usually find one. What I'm about to describe is the one time in my life I looked for that explanation and came up empty. This happened 3 years ago. I was doing some freelance photography work, mostly architectural stuff, real estate, that kind of thing. A friend of mine who worked in property development told me about an old farmhouse on the edge of a plot of land his company had just acquired. They were going to tear it down within the month, and he thought I might want to photograph it before it was gone. He said it was over 100 years old and still had most of its original interior. From a photography standpoint, that's exactly the kind of thing I'd want to document. He gave me the address and the gate code and told me to go whenever I wanted. It was fully abandoned. The property had been purchased from an estate, no living relatives had made a claim on it, and the last person confirmed to have lived there had died sometime in the early 90s. The house had been closed up for over 30 years. I went on a Tuesday afternoon, alone. This is the part I'd do differently. The property was at the end of a long gravel road, completely hidden from the main road by a row of old oak trees. The farmhouse sat at the back of an overgrown field, 2 stories, wood-framed, faded white paint with green shutters, most of them hanging at angles or missing entirely. A barn stood about 50 meters to the left. Both structures looked like they were being slowly absorbed back into the land. I spent about an hour outside, walking the perimeter, photographing the exterior in the late afternoon light. The light was excellent, low and golden and hitting the weathered wood beautifully. I was enjoying the work. Nothing felt wrong yet. The front door wasn't locked. It pushed open with some resistance, the wood swollen from years of humidity. Inside, the smell was immediate. A dense, closed-in smell, layered with something sweet and wrong that I recognized from other old buildings, organic decay. But there was something else underneath it that I couldn't identify, faintly chemical, almost medicinal. The downstairs was remarkable. Everything was still there. Furniture, rugs, framed pictures on the walls, a dining table set for a meal that was never served, plates still in place, covered in a thick mat of dust. There was a grandfather clock in the hallway that had stopped at 3:17. I photographed all of it. I spent a long time in that dining room. What I found on the walls interested me most. The family, whoever they had been, had covered the walls of the main hallway with photographs, dozens of them framed and hung in a rough chronological order. The oldest ones were the stiff formal portraits from the early 1900s. As the decades moved forward, the photographs became more candid, more relaxed. Birthdays, holidays, people in a yard I recognized as the one outside. I was photographing this wall when I noticed something in one of the older pictures. It was a group portrait, maybe 15 people arranged in front of the farmhouse, the same farmhouse I was standing in. I put my lens close to it to read the handwriting on a small label at the bottom of the frame. It said, Summer 1931. In the back row of the photograph, slightly separated from the rest of the group, was a figure. Everyone else in the picture was looking at the camera. This person was looking to the side, toward a window. It was hard to make out much detail. The photo was old and faded, but the figure was taller than the others, and they were wearing something dark. I remembered noting it as an interesting compositional element and moving on. Upstairs, there were 4 bedrooms. 3 of them were ordinary.
Beds, dressers, personal effects left behind in that heartbreaking way that abandoned places always have. The fourth room, at the end of the hall, was different. It was the only room in the house with no windows. And it was the only room with a lock on the outside of the door. The lock was a simple sliding bolt, and it was currently unlatched. I stood in the hallway for a moment before I opened that door. I'm not sure what I was waiting for. I pushed it open. The room was small and completely empty. No furniture, no belongings, no rug. Just bare floorboards and 4 bare walls. There was a smell in there that was much stronger than the rest of the house, that chemical, medicinal undercurrent I'd noticed when I first came in. It was sharp enough to make my eyes water slightly. On the wall directly across from the door, at about eye level, someone had scratched words into the plaster. Not written, scratched, like with a fingernail. I moved my flashlight across it to read. It said, "Do not leave her alone." I stood in that room long enough to take 2 photographs. Then I left. The rational explanation assembled itself as I walked back down the hallway. A family member with an illness, perhaps, mental or physical, kept in a room for their safety or for the family's. The lock on the outside, the bare room. Someone had been cared for or confined in there a long time ago. That was a sad story, but a human one. I was okay with it. I went back downstairs, did one more pass through the main rooms, and then decided to check the barn before the light was completely gone. Outside, the air felt good after all that closed-in stillness. The barn door was on a rail, and I slid it open about halfway and went in. The interior was mostly collapsed. The loft had given way on one side and taken a section of the roof with it. I moved carefully along the edge of the space, photographing what I could. Near the back wall, there were old wooden crates stacked against the siding, some kind of farm equipment that had rusted into abstract shapes, and on one of the crates, someone had left a framed photograph. It was facing outward, like it had been placed there deliberately, propped up to be seen. I picked it up. It was a picture of the farmhouse, a relatively recent one based on the photograph quality, color, not black and white, which put it somewhere in the last few decades. The farmhouse looked more or less the same as it did now. It was a wide shot taken from out here, from roughly where the barn would be, looking across the field toward the house. In the upstairs window, the window of the room with no windows that I'd just been standing in, there was a shape, tall, standing at a window that shouldn't have had any light behind it, looking out. I put the photograph back down on the crate. I picked up my camera bag. I walked back to my car at a pace that I would not describe as running, but was close. I went home and loaded my photographs onto my computer. I was almost through the full set when I got to the photographs I'd taken of the hallway wall, the family portraits. I zoomed in on the 1931 group photo, the figure in the back row, the one looking toward the window instead of the camera. In the high-resolution version, you could make out more detail than I'd been able to see standing in the hallway. The figure was tall. They were wearing dark clothing, and they were not looking at a window. They were looking at the camera, directly at it, eyes forward. While everyone around them faced the photographer, this person was already looking somewhere else in the frame, at a point that, if you trace the line of their gaze forward through 90 years of time, would land roughly where I had been standing in that hallway. I sent the photographs to my friend at the property company. He was happy with them. I didn't mention the room at the end of the hall, or the photograph in the barn, or the figure in the 1931 portrait. There was nothing useful to say about any of it. The house was demolished 3 weeks later. I still have the photographs. All of them. I've looked at the 1931 portrait dozens of times, telling myself there's a simple explanation. A child turning at the last moment. A trick of the deteriorated film. The way the eye finds faces in ambiguous shapes. I tell myself that. But the eyes in that photograph are in perfect focus. They are the sharpest thing in the image, and they are looking directly, clearly, and without any ambiguity at who I would one day stand in that spot. They were looking at me.